What is up, everyone? Today I'm doing something I didn't think I'd be doing, and that's going back to the DCEU with Chris McQuarrie's comments about his Green Lantern movie and a Man of Steel sequel. What's up, everyone? DC Chronicle here. Like and subscribe if you're new. If you haven't already, we do everything DC here. Today we're talking about Chris McQuarrie's interview with the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast. Now, Chris McQuarrie is an amazing filmmaking mind. I've been a fan of him for years, and it's a really interesting interview. I do strongly recommend that you go and check out that interview in full, but today we're just going to be talking about his comments around Green Lantern and his Superman movie, because what he said about those two characters really intrigued me and really kind of spoke to me and made me think about how this could have been had he been able to make these two movies that he wanted to make. Now, I'm assuming that Tom Cruise would have played Hal Jordan, and it would have been Hal Jordan as Green Lantern. So my commentary around what he's saying is based on it's Tom Cruise as Hal Jordan and Henry Cavill as Superman. And then obviously, just for reference, because I know you have to every time with this, I loved the DCEU and I loved the Snyderverse. At the same time, I'm really excited for the DCU and I'm excited for what James Gunn is going to do. So it is possible to like them both. I love what the DCU has been so far and I'm really excited for the future. So just, that disclaimer, we've got to put it out there. It's okay to like both. So just to recap what Chris said, he was offered Green Lantern at first, but him and Henry, when they were on the set of Mission Impossible Fallout, they had discussed a Man of Steel sequel and what potentially their take on Superman would look like. So what the pitch ended up being was like a 2-movie deal, a Green Lantern movie that had Superman in it, and then a Superman movie that had Green Lantern in it. And one of the things that Chris says in the interview that solved Green Lantern for him was that the power ring does need charging back up. And I like how he said it's not a bug, it's a feature. And that's an interesting way of thinking about that. You've seen it before in comics and animation where Green Lantern's battery runs out, the power ring battery runs out, and it's always played off. It's kind of awkward or kind of a funny moment, or at least in what I've seen, it's always been played off as kind of funny or awkward. But just reading between the lines of what Chris was saying, and there's a lot of reading between the lines here. He didn't go into much detail on purpose. He was very vague about things, but that would have been part of Hal's growth. So he only has enough charge. There's 2 people need saving. He only has enough charge for 1 person, and he has to make that choice of who does he save and who does he not. Or, he potentially finds himself in danger and he has to save someone else over saving himself. I do love that take on it. And something that he said about Superman that was a mistake was kind of increasing the scope of threats to Superman, this all-powerful being, and dealing with his power is increasing the threat, missing out on kind of those personal stories. And I think the same can be true for Green Lantern, and that's something that I took from this interview with Chris. Because when I think about what I want from a Green Lantern movie, right, is this big space opera. I've always said Green Lantern could be like a Star Wars-esque franchise that's also within the DC franchise as well. I think about Red Lanterns and all the different spectrums and going off in space. But perhaps you are missing out on some of the more personal stories around Hal and him navigating just the world, just Earth, and using his powers that way. I know the Lanterns TV show that we're getting is going to be very Earth-based and very personal in that way. So I'm hoping that's kind of what they've taken from this, is maybe starting small with Green Lantern and having smaller stakes, and then you have the opportunity to blow it up later on and go into space and do all that. So again, the DCU is a 10-year plan. Hopefully by the end of the 10 years, we do get to the big space stuff, but you don't have to start there with Green Lantern. You can start with these more personal stakes, and that's something that I really like based on what Chris said. Another thing that he did touch on was the similarities between Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, and Superman, and how that could be a cause for conflict. And that's something you always hear about Superman and Batman and people like that, but a Superman Green Lantern conflict would be really great. And you think about some of the similarities that they have when you think about moral code, and I can imagine Superman being very diplomatic and using hope, whereas Hal being a lot more pragmatic and kind of aggressive in some ways. with how different situations should be dealt with. That could be a great conflict. And how they lead. So if Superman as a leader is more authoritarian up against a kind of headstrong Hal and Green Lantern, along with the use of powers as well, how we just talked about how the power ring needs recharged and you have to be careful about when you use it. And then obviously Superman doesn't really need recharge. I know sometimes he does if he uses like a solar flare or something, but for the most part he doesn't need recharged. And so Hal giving examples to Clark on when and how to use powers, and sometimes, you know, not using them is the right thing. Seeing that conflict and seeing that resolution would have been a great movie as well. At the end, they kind of realize they both have the same goals, they want the same thing, and they end up teaming up, which is what you want to see. You want to see the Justice League, and for me, Green Lantern is a huge part of the Justice League. And then he also teased his Superman movie, and I was so intrigued by what he said, and it sort of had me feeling a certain way, because he talked about the first 5 minutes and he compared it to the first 5 minutes of Up, the Pixar movie, which I'm sure we all know. It's the famous scene. There's no dialogue. It's just the man and the woman, they get married, they have kids, they grow old, and then eventually it's just the man by himself. And I can imagine a Superman version of that. He doesn't say it's with Lois, but you have to assume we'd get basically Up, but with Clark and Lois, them growing old, and then Clark's greatest fear, he says, which for me is ultimately losing Lois, and how that fear would drive how he behaves and how he acts to certain threats in a Man of Steel sequel. And I think that's quite interesting, and it kind of ties in and to other projects. So Superman and Lois, at the end of that show, we saw them both get old, and we saw how their story ends, and it was a little bit reminiscent of Up, I suppose. It did have the monologue, Clark's monologue over the top of it, but it was them both getting old and you seeing that play out. And then a lot of the Snyderverse revolved around the death of Lois Lane. So I guess a little bit different in the sense of they don't grow old and then she just naturally passes away. She's, you know, killed by Darkseid. But could that have linked in? So in a Man of Steel sequel, you would see Clark's fear, and you would see it's the thing that he's most afraid of is losing Lois Lane. And then it actually happens in Justice League 2, and then you kind of see that come to fruition and come to life. If Man of Steel 2, you have to assume it would be part of the DCEU. And so having that tease there would have been incredible, and having it tease the impact. Which, speaking of teasers, he does at the very end say, you know, he's got scripts, I assume, he's got pictures, maybe some storyboards, and they're out there, right? They're out there. I guess Warner Brothers has them. They're in the vault. They're on a hard drive somewhere, and they're waiting to be used. They could still be used, which got me thinking as to, could we implement some of this in the DCU? Not in the Snyderverse. I know Chris McQuarrie made this for the DCEU, made it for Henry Cavill. I mean, we could go on for hours, right, about the missed opportunities and what happened with the DCEU and the Snyderverse. Me personally, I've moved on now. I've made my peace with it. I've moved on to the future. I'm excited for what's to come. So there's no point saying, oh, we can bring back the Snyderverse and we can bring back Henry Cavill. I don't think that's going to happen unless in 10 years' time they do like a crisis thing and they bring everybody back. But for me, it's how could we implement this in the DCU? And when it comes to Superman, you know, there's nothing that he said that I'd feel like couldn't be implemented in the DCU. And as I said before, I love Chris McQuarrie. You know, I thought Mission Impossible Fallout was amazing. And I do think we will get a Superman sequel with David Corenswet. Now, I have to imagine James Gunn would write and direct a Superman sequel. But if for whatever reason he couldn't, you know, he's head of the whole thing, maybe he decides he can't do the Superman sequel, I'd love Chris McQuarrie to come in and do a Superman sequel. Or if not, just, you know, I'd be picking up the phone and being like, hey, what do you want to do? You know, we've got this new universe, we've got projects that we can do. I know we have the slate, but we've got lots of things that weren't on the initial announcement that are getting made. Clayface, the Dick Grayson, Jason Todd kind of animated kind of movie thing. Teen Titans as well, all seem to be on the horizon. Why not just pick up the phone and say, you know, what do you want to do? And if there was a really great idea for Superman, you know, I'd be very happy to let Chris McQuarrie do that. Either way, he would be a great get for the DCU. Much like, I feel like James Mangold with Swamp Thing. I know that's kind of on the back burner now, but getting someone like James Mangold is a great get, and Chris McQuarrie would be just as good of a get. However, on the Green Lantern side of things, I don't know how that could be implemented if we are thinking about Hal Jordan. His portrayal of Hal Jordan does sound quite different to what we're getting with Kyle Chandler. Again, I'm a big fan of Kyle Chandler. I'm looking forward to that. But I'm kind of the opinion that I do feel like Hal Jordan is going to die in this first season of Lanterns. And that will set up, he's mentoring John Stewart. Hal eventually dies, and then John Stewart goes out as the Green Lantern. And I do think when we get a Justice League movie or whatever the Justice League team-up looks like, John Stewart will be the Green Lantern of the Justice League. I do think the threat that Lanterns is going to find is the centre, and any Justice League movie will be kind of a New Frontier-esque type of movie. So I don't know if the Green Lantern stuff would really translate, but again, if Chris McQuarrie's got an idea for Green Lantern and it works with John Stewart, absolutely, I would love to see that. If you could rework that story. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I was very excited just hearing those little teasers of what he did, and yeah, it's a shame that it never happened, but you never know. Things work in weird ways in movie making. We've seen that. There could be some scope for Chris McQuarrie to come in and do something in DC. And what do you guys think? Would you like Chris McQuarrie to get involved in DC? If so, what projects would you like him to do, if not Superman and Green Lantern? There's a lot of stuff out there that's right for the picking with someone like him. Again, he's a great movie-making mind. I recommend you checking out the Happy Sad Confused podcast with him on there. If you're just interested in films and movie making, it's a really, really great listen. Even if he did do like an Elseworlds type thing that wasn't part of the DCU, I still like to see that if there was nothing for him in the DCU or nothing that excited him in the DCU. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Thanks a lot for watching. Like and subscribe, and I will catch you all in the next one.